Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. There are two huge news that everyone is discussing while we're waiting for the Ukrainian counteroffensive. One is the huge explosion in Crimea, where oil refinery and storage facility has been blown up by Ukrainian drones. Well, no one says that they're Ukrainian drones, but they're Ukrainian drones, let's be honest. And second one is the explosion in Pavlograd after a whole night raid from the Russian forces. So what are the implications of these explosions? First, let's discuss the easier one of the two, and it is easier only nominally because we have less information about it, so it's less to tell. It was the explosion on Ukrainian-controlled Pavlograd, which is located right here. And that explosion has been happening overnight, and it was pretty big, and generally speaking, Ukrainian side did not give any major versions of the events. The only kind of official statement that I was able to find was that it was some kind of a industrial facility that got blown up. But that was about it. There are a big chemical plant in Pavlograd, and there is also a train station right next to that chemical power plant. Russian side, on the other hand, has claimed that it was a whole train that was filled with S-300 systems and missiles to them. And to be honest, my feeling is it a little bit of a bullshit. Mostly because while the explosion pattern that we saw in Pavlograd was very similar to how S-300s explode, it's just kind of weird that we suddenly say that Ukraine has all of these S-300 systems stored at one place and not distributed all across the front lines, while supposedly accurate leaked secret papers were saying that Ukraine is about to run out of any kind of air defense assets, Soviet air defense assets at all. So it's very dubious. Second theory that was discussed, and again, it was mostly promoted by either pro-Russian public spaces or by some of the, let's just say, less than credible sources about the fact that it was old intercontinental ballistic missile systems that were stored in the chemical factory nearby. Whatever it was, I've heard reports that it was supposedly an ammo depot, and I gotta say that I don't really find that completely accurate. We saw multiple explosions, yes, that is true. However, we also, after that, people from the event, like from Pavlograd and area, started posting videos about damage being done to their apartments because the explosion was quite large. And what we did not hear on the back was continuing explosions of ammunition in the area. Because we know that if a large stockpile of weapons is usually hit, then not only it would have a big explosions, but also it would be going for hours, some kind of secondary detonations. So most likely the detonations that we saw was like a closely packed area with some kind of a big storage ammunition facilities, because we saw some kind of secondary explosions on the video, but again, it wasn't like it was going on for hours. In any case, we don't really know what exploded. People start claiming that's it, Ukrainian counteroffensive now is cancelled, and obviously it's a pure propaganda, you shouldn't believe it. Second explosion that happened and was quite noticeable is the explosion in the Russian-occupied Crimea. And it was the strike against the fuel storage facilities of Russian Black Sea Fleet. One of the questions asked to me beforehand was, what will Ukraine do about Russian Black Sea Fleet? Well, one of the options on what to do with the Black Sea Fleet is leave it without fuel. Without fuel, a lot of ships will have troubles running. Now, the important thing is to not get into too much hype with this explosion. While it is significant, there was a lot of fuel burned. Russia is a huge producer of oil and also oil derivatives such as fuel. So while there was a lot of fuel burned, True. And the fuel facilities has been destroyed. True. So the resupply to that specific facility is questionable, not only because the facility is destroyed, but also Crimean Bridge is still not fully operational. But there are plenty of other storage facilities in Crimea that are still operational. So technically, if Russia will need to use fuel and will need to fuel the ships, there are ways to get that fuel. It's going to be problematic, it's additional logistics, it complicates things, but it's possible. Now, importantly, while I'm saying all of this, is that it is right to understand that if it's just an initial hit and we're going to see additional explosions on the fuel storages across Crimea, that will start accumulating and we will get in a complete devastating effect when a huge Russian grouping will not have the proper supply of fuel. We also heard how this happened because the problem of hitting fuel tanks is that while fuel, we all think it's like, oh yeah, it's probably gonna big explosion and everything explodes, boom, boom, like movies tell us. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Fuel needs proper mixing with oxygen. So what needs to happen and what did happen in this explosion, that the first drone hit the storage tanks. The storage tanks blew open, and only then the second drone hit them to ignite the fuel itself. We heard that it was anywhere in between from 2 to 6 Ukrainian drones that flew in, and they were able to fly in because the unit that was stationed to specifically protect this base, we know, has been sent towards the front lines to make the life of Ukrainian pilots harder. And because Russia has deployed a lot of the S-400 assets on the ground in Crimea, so they think that if S-400 are deployed, then potentially they thought that they're going to protect against everything. But Ukraine has been doing scouting missions for months now. If you followed any kind of updates daily, then you know that it was always, oh, Ukraine launched some drones to Crimea. Oh, Ukraine has launched some drones to Crimea. In this case, we see how the small initiatives, small tactical moves accumulated to bring a nice, potentially strategically significant change to the front line. And talking about front lines, let's give you a quick version about what's happening. Again, same situation as we've heard before around Kherson, where Ukrainian sabotage groups are making life of Russians on the left side of Dnieper miserable. Mostly artillery duels around the whole southern front line. Around Avdiivka, after Russians did a big push and they actually were beaten really, really heavily, one of the latest pushes, Ukrainians are actually gathered forces and they counterattacked. And the reports were that a lot of Russians actually ran or didn't fight or didn't really put up a lot of resistance. But don't get me wrong, like there's still heavy fighting there is happening, but there were specific units of Russians that did not produce that kind of fight. This allowed Ukrainians to retrieve some of the territory back, which is great. Again, but overall, it's a tactical improvement for Ukrainian position. Bakhmut. So around Bakhmut, I told you that there was a very, very tough position where Wagnerites were mostly pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And then they kind of started, I guess, running out. And then the VDV came in to help the Wagnerites. Now the reports are that VDV is almost not participating and it's now literally purely Wagner. More importantly than that, there was a very tough time when Russians were trying to attack this road of death, but Ukrainians still held. And more importantly, Ukrainians actually pushed the Russians out. So the most recent reports are that Ukrainians were able to counterattack and push Russians a little bit, like a couple of 100 meters away from their positions. Latest couple of days were a little bit more silent in that perspective. Now, no one is expecting that Ukrainians are actually finally winning. What is expected is that Wagnerites, they want to capture or have been ordered to capture Bakhmut until the 9th of May, which is a big celebration day for a lot of Russians. And because of that, they want to just accumulate forces and essentially put all the forces together. And in the coming 1 or 2 days, there's going to be like a big multi-day push to make sure Bakhmut is captured by the 9th of May. So we should, and Ukrainians are also in place, that there is basically silence before the storm. And I will talk about Prigozhin's description of what's happening in there in a second. The same is happening also in the area around Kremina. We also hear about local tactical fighting. So overall, the front line is stable with tactical fighting and improvement from one or the other side happening here and there, with Bakhmut obviously happening, with Bakhmut being the most intense place. And we actually got some numbers where it was said that right now at Bakhmut direction there is over 25,500 Russian troops that are present and fighting. At least that was what reported by one of the sources from Ukrainian side. And then let's talk about Prigozhin. You might have heard in news that he gave a huge interview to Semen Pegov. He's been very, very vocal, and we all need to remember why, because his life is literally dependent right now on what's happening in Ukraine. But in that interview, he has been saying that they don't have enough ammunition, that they cannot proceed without enough ammunition, that they are almost ready to pull out Wagner forces, that basically they are all dying out. And the important part here is that we need to understand that this is not meant for us. Prigozhin is in a big conflict of interest between him and Russian general staff. We've seen this before when Prigozhin made this whole long, confusing write-up when he was talking about the corrupted elites inside of Russia, that he was trying to essentially sway Putin on his side, saying that they need to fight, and if they lose, then it's fine because they will create new elites. So Prigozhin is right now in a position and a fight for his life, because he is losing. He understands this. The fact that he's saying that Ukrainians are beating Wagner might not even be true. Maybe he still have plenty of Wagner forces. But it's important the optics and the messages that he's putting out. It is clear that he has been close, like because he got in a very hot waters with a lot of people around Putin, so he doesn't have access to Putin directly anymore, at least in one sense or another. So instead, he tries to reach that access through the public media. And he wants to make that access heard by making outrageous claims, by making people really upset and so on. So when he's saying things, you always need to think that it is not for us. It is not the real situation on the battlefield that he's describing, because he wants to paint a picture that all this nice and glorious and patriotic self-sacrificial Wagners have been trying to achieve victory in Ukraine for so long, whereas the Ministry of Defense and all of the corrupted elites, they are just looking to freeze this war or like surrender Russia or so, and they are preventing Prigozhin from achieving it. He is trying to essentially to explain that his defeat, if it's going to be coming, it's not happening because it's his fault. It's because he didn't get enough ammo. There was enemies right near Putin in the Ministry of Defense, because we saw recently that Putin did favor a lot of Ministry of Defense. So what we're seeing for Prigozhin and from his statements is just some court play, what they're having in their own royal Tsar's agenda. They are trying to backstab each other. They're trying to poison each other. Essentially, I'm talking about it generally. You understand what I mean? So you should not take the words of Prigozhin as it's an actual fact. He is a liar, and he will say everything that will make essentially Putin reconsider scrapping him. That's his goal. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will do more videos this week, but I'm working on kind of like larger video. I hope you will like it when it's gonna come out. Last week was kind of shitty for me, like it was complete fucking nightmare. So thanks a lot. Slava Ukraini. I love you all, and I'll see you guys next time.